The world of crypto has seen its share of scandals and surprises, but nothing could have prepared the industry for what happened on October 23, 2025. On that day, Donald Trump, in a move that sent shockwaves through global markets, granted a full presidential pardon to Changpeng Zhao, better known as CZ, the founder and former CEO of Binance. In an instant, one of the most controversial figures in crypto went from convicted felon to redeemed icon. The news spread like wildfire. Screens lit up from New York to Hong Kong as traders, investors and journalists scrambled to interpret what this meant. Bitcoin jumped, Binance Coin surged, and the crypto market, long weighed down by fear of regulation, suddenly felt a gust of wild optimism. But beneath that excitement lay an uneasy question. Was this truly redemption, or was it the ultimate insider signal, a green light for those who had known all along what was coming? In the space of a single headline, history seemed to bend. Binance, which had spent years in the shadow of government lawsuits, fines, and regulatory scrutiny, had just been handed something no corporation can usually buy: absolution. The implications weren't merely legal, they were psychological, political, and financial. The markets had been conditioned to see CZ as the cautionary tale of crypto's excess. Now he was the symbol of its rebirth. And behind every euphoric tweet and market rally, whispers began to emerge. Who benefited the most from this moment, and what did they know before it happened? Before the pardon could ever be considered, there had to be a fall. For years, CZ had built Binance into the largest and most powerful exchange in the world, controlling billions in daily volume and influencing everything from token launches to market sentiment. But power attracts pressure. And in 2023, regulators finally cracked down. The U.S. Department of Justice, the CFTC, and other agencies accused Binance of violating anti-money laundering laws and failing to report suspicious transactions that could have been tied to terrorism and crime. The empire began to buckle. CZ pleaded guilty to violating the Bank Secrecy Act and agreed to step down as CEO. Binance was fined over $4.3 billion in penalties, one of the largest corporate fines in history. Overnight, Binance went from revolutionary to, well, radioactive. Users fled, liquidity dried up, and its rivals, Coinbase, Kraken, and other exchanges, quietly celebrated the downfall of a giant. But while the world thought CZ was finished, something else was happening behind the scenes. Binance didn't crumble, it reorganized. Leadership shifted, internal controls were strengthened, and new divisions were created to handle compliance. What appeared to be a death sentence became a deep restructuring. Like a serpent shedding its skin, Binance endured the fire only to re-emerge leaner, more cautious, and, honestly, far more dangerous. When the pardon hit, it was more than news. It was ignition. Markets, especially crypto markets, are built on perception, and perception is a kind of magic. The moment the announcement came, Bitcoin's price spiked within minutes, Ethereum followed, and Binance's own token, BNB, exploded in trading volume. Billions of dollars shifted hands within hours. But beyond the numbers, there was something primal happening: the restoration of belief. Investors who had abandoned Binance during its darkest months suddenly returned. Traders who had called CZ a liability now hailed him as a survivor. Twitter spaces erupted with theories, some celebrating Trump's so-called pro-innovation stance, while others, decried corruption and insider politics. But the market didn't care about moral debates. It cared about momentum, and this pardon was pure fuel. This wasn't just a financial rebound, it was psychological warfare. For months, the crypto industry had felt like a hunted species, under siege by regulators and lawmakers. The CZ pardon flipped the narrative. It said, "The war is over, you can build again." No pardon exists in isolation. Every political act is a message, and Trump's decision to pardon CZ was a masterstroke of timing and symbolism. On the surface, it framed him as a champion of innovation, a leader who forgave the visionary who pushed too far. But underneath the optics was strategy. Binance had deep connections across global finance, from venture capital firms in the Middle East to political donors in the United States. The pardon, many suspected, wasn't simply about forgiveness, it was about alignment. For weeks before the announcement, subtle signals had been building. Binance's blockchain showed a quiet accumulation of BNB by dormant wallets. Liquidity pools began shifting mysteriously. Trading volumes on certain pairs started spiking in ways that didn't align with broader market trends. None of it made sense until the pardon. The truth is, markets have ears. News doesn't leak, it seeps. Somewhere, somehow, information finds its way into the hands of those who can act before the rest of the world even knows what's coming. And when the pardon dropped, those same wallets began to unload at the peak, realizing millions in profit within hours. It was insider behavior at its most refined, not overt, not reckless, but precise. By the time the average investor heard the news, the first wave of profits was already gone. The charts tell the story better than any tweet could. Accumulation, anticipation, explosion, exit. What the public saw as opportunity, insiders saw as execution. Binance wasted no time capitalizing on the moment. Within days of the pardon, CZ was back in the spotlight, his image rebranded from exile to visionary. The company launched new partnerships, reactivated suspended projects, and began rolling out global marketing campaigns that emphasized trust, innovation, and rebirth. Exchanges that had distanced themselves quietly renewed business with Binance. The giant had returned, and the world, whether it liked it or not, accepted it. The most fascinating part was how the market treated the event not as a scandal but as a comeback story. Forgiveness sells better than failure. Binance's trading volume returned to pre-crisis levels within 2 weeks. Its venture arm began investing in emerging AI blockchain integrations, while institutional investors once skeptical of crypto regulation began buying back into BNB and affiliated ecosystems. The phoenix had risen and it came back breathing fire. The phoenix had risen, and it came back breathing fire. The price charts from the days following the pardon read like a heartbeat resuscitated. BNB climbed 30% in 3 days. Bitcoin crossed psychological resistance at $72,000. But the numbers alone don't tell the whole story. What fueled the surge was narrative control. Binance turned its crisis into a campaign, framing the pardon not as favoritism, but as freedom, a victory for decentralization over bureaucracy. Binance turned its crisis into a campaign, framing the pardon not as favoritism, but as freedom, a victory for decentralization over bureaucracy. Every influencer, trading platform, and crypto publication began echoing the same line: crypto is back. Binance didn't just ride the wave, it built it. With every upward tick, retail investors piled in, convinced this was the start of the next bull cycle. But in truth, this was less about fundamentals and more about psychology. In the eyes of institutions, Binance was no longer a rogue exchange, it was a reformed powerhouse. This transformation created an illusion of safety. Hedge funds that once hesitated now viewed Binance as too connected to fail. Regulatory risk was replaced by political protection. That perception drew in billions in new institutional liquidity. For smaller investors, it reinforced a dangerous but intoxicating belief that as long as politics backed crypto, the market could only rise. Was this justice or manipulation? The same system that once punished CZ now held him up as an example of resilience. But forgiveness at this scale is rarely moral, it's transactional. Critics argued that the pardon undermined accountability in finance, creating a precedent where influence outweighs integrity. To many, CZ's freedom symbolized a system that rewards those with reach, not righteousness. But in crypto, where rebellion is part of the culture, this paradox didn't hurt him, it enhanced him. With the past erased, Binance moved faster than ever. New offices opened across Asia, the Middle East and Africa. Licensing talks resumed with previously hostile regulators. The exchange reasserted itself as a global hub, not just for trading but for the infrastructure of digital finance. CZ's return emboldened teams worldwide, reigniting projects that had been frozen during his legal battles. Global adoption accelerated and the narrative shifted. Binance became the unofficial proof of that policy shift, creating ripple effects through other exchanges now seeking political favor. Every great recovery brings predators. In the aftermath of the pardon, whale wallets began moving again. Massive positions accumulated during Binance's low period were suddenly sold into the frenzy of optimism. Retail investors, caught in the rush, became exit liquidity. This cycle of manipulation wasn't new, but it was executed flawlessly. The very networks that built Binance's dominance in the bull runs of 2017 and 2021 had returned, exploiting the same mechanics: hype, liquidity, and timing. The whales didn't just profit from the pardon, they orchestrated the waves around it. Mainstream media embraced the spectacle. Outlets that once condemned CZ now celebrated his comeback. Articles portrayed the pardon as symbolic of America's renewed spirit of innovation. The irony was glaring. The same journalists who once wrote about crypto's reckoning now called it crypto's redemption. But that's the power of narrative. It doesn't need truth, only momentum. Binance understood this better than anyone. The company's PR machine flooded news cycles, sponsoring thought pieces, influencer partnerships, and summit appearances that painted the brand as futuristic and reformed. The pardon didn't just restore Binance's image, it made it richer. Every new user drawn in by the headlines meant trading fees, liquidity, and renewed dominance in DeFi ecosystems tied to BNB chain. Binance leveraged the publicity to push new token launches and staking programs, creating fresh layers of revenue. Underneath the moral debate, one fact stood clear. The pardon wasn't just political theater, it was profitable. Binance's revenue in the month following the event eclipsed its previous quarterly averages. Redemption had become a business model. For all its triumph, Binance now faces a new kind of danger. Political favor is volatile. What one administration forgives, another can revisit. Across the globe, regulators in Europe and Asia remain skeptical, quietly preparing their own inquiries. Crypto thrives on volatility, but institutions fear it. As Binance grows larger and more politically entangled, its margin for error narrows. Its power is immense, but so is the risk of collapse should its alliances fracture. The story of CZ's pardon reveals more than political strategy. It exposes how financial systems adapt to influence. The people who understood this dynamic weren't just traders, they were sociologists of power. They saw that markets aren't driven by charts, they're driven by permission. When that permission shifts, everything changes. This is the new age of crypto, not a battle of code, but a war of narratives. Whoever controls the story controls the flow of money. Binance proved that survival isn't about compliance, it's about perception. The pardon of Changpeng Zhao will be remembered not only as one man's redemption, but as a defining moment in the history of cryptocurrency. It blurred the line between justice and opportunity, between power and profit. In that gray space, Binance rose once again, not because of what it built, but because of what it symbolized: resilience, audacity, and the ability to turn punishment into profit. But the deeper truth remains: crypto's illusion of freedom often hides the same systems of control it claims to resist. Every empire, whether in banks or blockchains, lives or dies by its ability to manipulate belief. The CZ pardon proved that belief can be manufactured, and when it is, markets will always follow.